Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining me to discuss a topic that we've touched on a little bit during the day, but is become increasingly important over the last 20 years or so, which is, as we've watched the US have this amazing ambition and willingness to take risk in innovation that has left Europe far behind. Mario Draghi, in his great report last year, talked about how Europe has no 100 billion euro companies that have been created in the last 50 years, while in America, all of the 7, I think it is now, trillion-dollar companies have all been created in the last 50 years. So every time I think about this, I get more depressed about where we've ended up here in Europe. So hopefully we will find some solutions to that today. So I want to start with Dan, who is a founder. Europe has this great set of talent and this big market. Why has it fallen short?
I think if we go back to the history, Europe has done amazing stuff, right? 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. And I think somehow we lost the energy, the attitude to win by not working hard enough, by putting so many regulations that makes hard to do innovation. And I think by forgetting the future, it's there, bright, only if you invest in the right technology today. These are the 3 key things that I think has contributed to the decline that we have. But I'm very hopeful, and we're going to talk more about it.
Okay. Ida, you founded Clue in Berlin. Can you talk a little bit about your journey, whether you recognize some of the points that Dan's made and how you felt the entrepreneurial system worked?
Well, as we started raising money in Europe, we found that quite difficult. We went to Silicon Valley, we found money in America, and then we came back to Europe, and then the Europeans wanted to invest. But
at a higher valuation, I imagine.
Much higher.
It was good to have Americans set the valuation. No, but I think for me it was a point to actually prove that you can build a big tech company out of Europe. And in your introduction, you say that America has sort of left us in the dust. But I think in some dimensions that's true. But I think we need to start thinking about success much more multidimensional. And in many dimensions, I think Europe is doing very well. And probably has more of a sort of key to what a society needs to be for the future than maybe what America has. So I don't know if we're doing so badly. I think we need to figure out, once we have made the billion-dollar companies and built the technology, then what do we want to do with that? And I'm not sure America has the answers. I think we need to find our own answers.
Okay. We'll get to that later on. Peje, you come from Sweden, which has had, for a relatively small country, some outsized successes. Can you talk a little bit about that ecosystem and what's been successful there?
Yeah. Thank you. You know, I recall a bit Sweden in the past. You go back to 1850. Sweden was the poorest country in Europe then. We had 3.5 million people, 1.3 fled to the US. And then we got a new Minister of Finance who got rid of guilds and the system, opened up the market. And a number of leading Swedish corporations were founded at the turn of the century. It took a number of years. Private-public partnership, and Sweden developed extremely successfully.
And also deregulation.
And, and if you then get back to what happened now, in the 80s, we were all very, very bureaucratic. At that time, if you wanted to have a telephone, you had to rent one from the public company because all telephones were natural monopolies. We had one television channel. 1% of all pupils went to private schools. 99% were in the same monolithic system. And then we made a break and decided that everyone should have the right to choose a school and go to that school regardless, and let it being paid for by the taxpayers. So now we have 20% of all the students going to independent private schools. Competition, choice. So my conclusion for the future of entrepreneurship here in Europe is that we should agree upon a new single market for education and healthcare. Vision 2050, let's learn from what they are doing in Saudi and put a 20-year perspective and make the change, get private entrepreneurs like you and others into the healthcare sector, get that more efficient, education sector more efficient, choice, competition. That is the future for Europe.
So deregulating and empowering individuals effectively. Michel, they've all talked a little bit about their experience in technology. You come from a slightly different world of fashion. Can you talk about your experience setting up a fashion business in the UK, but with global reach?
Yes, definitely. So my business model is I work with local craftsmanship across the continent, and we've been able to scale our business globally, based in the UK, and we have a huge customer base in the US and in Europe.
Okay, and how have you done that? What has been the main opportunities and the main challenges of doing that?
For me, I think it was important for me to understand that for me to really scale my business, I need to build systems across the continent. And I've been able to work with artisans across West Africa while showcasing our storytelling and just really just taking things on our own terms and just pushing that online.
Okay, great. Ida, so you talked a little bit about redefining success. Obviously, Europe has quite a good track record of building startup companies, but then, to your point, a lot of them do end up moving to the US or being sold to US companies. How do you avoid that brain drain, talent going away, and actually reverse that so talent is coming here instead?
As a founder, of course you want to make a great exit, and you want to be able to do great secondaries along the way, but you also care about being a physical body in some sort of environment. And I think that Europe has a lot to offer. I had 2 kids while I built a startup. I created a culture where people could thrive while also going to work. And I think if you have a more holistic perspective on what it takes to create a good life, Europe has a lot to offer. And how do we avoid the brain drain? Well, I think people increasingly want more things than only becoming millionaires. They also want a good life. And we have infrastructure that can help you do that here. We have childcare, we have healthcare, we have maybe a forest near a city. We have so many things. I think when you think about brain drain, I mean, if you think about it as a garden, right? What does it take to create a beautiful garden? You need all kind of things for it to grow. And I think it's the same with people. It's not only where do you get the best tax program, or this idea that you need to go near Stanford to find great talent. We've heard that many times on stage today. You can find great talent all over. So I think it's also a mindset, and then this kind of more, how do we grow all these different aspects of the surroundings that will make people want to be here. And I think Europe has a really great opportunity to be a place where we can make people come and want to live, not just work, but live.
But how does that work in the world that we live in, where investors want returns? They want their companies to succeed and win and scale. What you're talking about is quite a different model. And so how does that work in the context of you competing with America or with other countries where that ambition is different?
So when we talk about what it takes to be successful, I come from the consumer world where trust is a really big thing, right? We are asking people to share some of their most intimate data. And we can see that building, for instance, under regulations that support user privacy becomes a business asset. It becomes something that users actually choose and think is great. I don't think you have to imagine that competition is only sort of a free market. It can also be, honoring things that are more human. Because in the end, why do we build tech? We build tech to create human betterment. Like, we want to have good lives. And this idea that you can only compete on being the most kind of cash efficient or having the most capital, but there are actually many dimensions that you compete in. And I think having a broader sense of what does it take to build success, not just for your company, but for a society. I think, yeah.
Dan, how do you react to that from a talent perspective?
Usain Bolt is the fastest guy in running. Do we know who is the kindest guy when it runs? We don't know. The society doesn't care. The society cares for whom that can win. And if we don't win, and I think Europe is a great place because of the winnings and the hard works that Germans and French and Brits did 50 years ago, 40 years ago, and maybe a few hundred years ago, and we're still consuming that momentum, that wave. But that wave is slowing down. And if we don't wake up and create a new wave for the next generations to ride, slowly the decline will come. We have the greatest empire from Egypt to Persian Empire that, Persia used to be 50% of the world GDP, 5-0. Today, it's not even 1%. The same is happening for Europe, but the luck we have, the good news we have, we can change it really fast. And we can change it not in 20 years, not in 30 years, in probably 10 years. But we have to wake up.
And we've seen, obviously we've seen China transform in
100%.
20 years,
in 30 years, every year they've grown more than 10% year-on-year GDP, and they're one of the largest GDPs in the world and one of the most innovative nations in the world.
And so what are you seeing in talent at the moment? Are you seeing it still leaving Europe? What is the facts on the ground right now?
A lot of people are leaving, a lot of great companies are leaving for all the good reasons, like tax, not enough capital, flexibility to be able to have opportunities, but also from the company perspective, it's really hard to adapt and adjust your company quickly if you're in Europe. Let's say if you have 500 people in France, it's really tough suddenly to increase your number of employees, but also it's really tough to decrease the number of employees if you have to. And sometimes you have to make tough decisions for a variety of reasons. So the combination of these things, I do not know any strong entrepreneurs in the UK that is not thinking to leave UK and Europe. I don't know. The only ones that they are not leaving, they are the ones that they are divorced and they have their kids, and because of their kids, they can't move.
Is that something that you see as well, Michelle? What's your sense? You operate in Nigeria, you operate in the UK, you operate in America. Do you get a very different sense of a different level of ambition and risk-taking in your employees in those different places?
Yeah, definitely. To add to what you just said, I feel like right now, you find a lot of creatives in Europe, in the UK, moving to places like the US, because the US is a country that really celebrates talent. It wants people to succeed. So what we tend to see happen is there's more funding. And I feel like because of this, and because Europe it's more restrictive, there's more regulations in place that really restricts creatives in Europe, which of course is a problem. And because of this, creatives are looking at other ways to just build what they want to do and be able to grow their business scalably in places like the US.
Okay. And is your sense that, these companies, is there something that can be done to change that dynamic in the UK? What would you shift?
I would say definitely the regulations. I think that Europe doesn't necessarily celebrate entrepreneurs that are really bringing new innovations. They find ways to restrict them. It might not be intentional, but it's just because of all the regulations in place, right? And that is something that I would definitely change.
And the attitude to success and wealth, which is different.
Definitely, it's not often celebrated as much as what we see in the US.
Okay. Peje, in Sweden, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but it feels like, there has become this ecosystem where talent has stuck around a bit more and certain companies have built to a bigger scale. Is that correct? And if so, why is that happening in Sweden in a different way?
I think we had lots of big companies like Spotify, Klarna, and others. So we have had a field for entrepreneurs. This was not so when I started in the 70s. Then we were building another kind of society. So you have lots of very inspiring people. But if I go back to what in Europe, if you take the healthcare sector, you saw very interesting information here about how much money being spent. But countries are spending between 16 to 18% of GDP and down to 2 to 3. And there is an enormous market. Healthcare and education is about 20-25% of GDP. And you see which is different from the entertainment market and hospitality market. So I see enormous possibilities if you take that creativity into this sector and see how can we improve the use of all that and then build a base for export of those services. That's in my school, I'm now running schools both in Saudi Arabia and in India. And it's an interesting shift because in all countries say, please come with new ways of doing education. And you see the same also in healthcare. So that's why I'm pushing this a bit. I'm telling you, it is traditional monopolies for politicians. And politicians want to preserve their monopoly, but in the long run, it won't function because people want to decide more by themselves. And there is such enormous possibilities bringing new tech and new things into this.
To empower people. And is there a different level of ambition in Sweden when companies start to scale, that investors are willing to keep backing them without selling them or moving them to the US? Because it feels like some of these companies had moments where they could have moved abroad or sold, but have stuck at it and kept going.
I think, let me put it this way, you can see more and more from traditional Swedish large corporation that when they go in and do big deals, that you need buybacks and agreements. Then in other countries, we need to come also with healthcare and education. So I see a combination, which is something new here, because in all countries you realize that education is also a very important security issue, building and everything, and so you are not only selling the products. And there I see an enormous advantage in Sweden, in Europe, with our background in doing things like that. But you have to really get to it's going and convincing young potential entrepreneurs that this is an interesting field.
Okay. Dan, I want to go to solutions, and I think there'll be some different viewpoints on the panel. But to start with you, one of the challenges in Europe has been change. It takes a long time, and making decisions has been a long time. But let's say that you have the power to do executive orders here in Europe. What would you do tomorrow if there were 5 things that needed to shift to make this a more dynamic entrepreneurial environment?
I think the first things I would start with regulation. And I won't just say, let's just do less regulations. I would say, cut half of all the regulations, and for the remaining half, every 5 years, cancel them unless it needs to be reissued, so that no regulation stays there like a net, slows down the continent. That would be number one. Number two, we are entering to an era that energy is the most important thing. And we have not invested in building energy capacity. US also has equally similar problem. China, I think, is the only country, and then Saudi and UAE. These are the only countries that they've been actually adding energy capacity. So more energy, nuclear, LNG, whatever it takes to increase the energy capacity. Because without energy, there is no AI. Without AI, I think we're going to be doomed if we don't get that right. And this happened to all the nations when they missed industrialization. Argentina, as an example, was top 6 economy in the world not too long ago. And look at where they are today. Then I will really focus on tax, because it feels good to tax citizens in short term. Gives more money to government, they can spend it, everybody happy. But it has this repelling effect. So I will reduce tax for tech AI companies, 0% corporate tax for 15 years. And then for employees of tech companies, an investor, I cap the tax to 10%. So more people start companies. And when I say tech, I don't mean IT software. I mean any innovative technology, whether it's like productions, manufacturing technology, and so on.
What about fashion? Would you include fashion?
Potentially fashion, potentially fashion.
I think
And then
that is the problem. I think that innovation needs to be redefined, because I think when
I agree, 100% agree. And then one European NASDAQ. We do not have a place for companies to go public in a right way. A good example, 1 week ago, DoorDash acquired Deliveroo for 10x less valuations than their fundamental. 10x difference. That is 10x arbitrage. We do not have a public market in Europe that is strong. We had UK and post-Brexit, that is gone. And finally, what is US? All immigrants. Half of them used to be German. Actually, speaking German was supposed to be the first language in the US. So they made it easy for immigrants to go there and grow. Europe can come up with initiatives for good talents, not random immigrations, good talents to come in, build stuff, number one. And most importantly, create an environment that the existing talent can work harder, can get rewarded when they work harder. At the moment, in certain countries, if you work too hard, you actually get penalized. And that stops growth. And finally, flexibility around talent. To give you one example, in UK or France, if I get a $2 billion contract, and if I have to deliver it in, let's say, 6 months time frame, with the kind of deadlines that, let's say, His Excellency MBS or Yasser puts for some of their projects, it's impossible to hire 1,000 people in 6 months, because everybody has 3 months, 6 months notice period. And the same way, if suddenly I lose a $1 billion contract, it's impossible to adjust my team so that I don't go out of business, because I can't fire people fast enough.
Okay.
And this,
I'm going to stop you there because we've got 5 minutes left. So I want to thank you for that. That's a very useful provocation. Michelle, will you just respond to the innovation redefinition point you want to make, and then I'm going to go to Ida to respond with her view.
Yes, I was just saying, because that normally is left out of the conversation. And we are finding that, like we said, a lot of creatives are leaving, and they are, like, the way creatives are basically the future of the world, because it shapes how we think, how we see things, and how we communicate with things. And I think that a lot of times with the ecosystem and innovation, we're focused on tech, coding, and creatives need to also be involved in that conversation of innovation as well.
I think it's a really good point.
100% agree.
Ida, do you share Dan's probably more American view of the world or not?
No, I think I disagreed probably with 95%.
I love her.
Oh gosh, I don't even know where to start. Maybe just a really practical thing. So at Clue, we serve 10 million users every month. One of the largest health apps for women on the planet. We decided to work 4 days per week at full salary. Production didn't go down. Productivity didn't go down. People were healthier, happier, fuller, more dedicated. There was more goodwill. We had absolutely brilliant retention in the company. We won on so many parameters. Why do we think we need to work harder? Okay, we need to work healthier. Okay, I'm going to suggest this. Why don't we imagine a Europe where it's the best place to be because it's the healthiest place? It's the place where people don't burn out, they're not lonely, they don't have anxiety, they're not obese, they don't have all the lifestyle diseases that are preventable. We have great healthcare, we have community, we have relationships. Imagine what talent we could attract and retain. Imagine if that was the vision for Europe. It's going to be the healthiest place on the planet, the best place to be a human body, not just the best place to build an AI, because why are we building an AI? What comes after? Let's talk about what society we want to build with this technology and with all the capital and with the competitiveness.
Build the biggest company in the world, and then let's do that.
It's always like, let's first get rich and screw the world and screw nature and everything that we actually live from, and then we can fix it. I suggest we start creating companies, societies, regions that are based on the principles of life. Let's create things that sustain life. I think that's a winning strategy.
So this is a debate that I would love to continue. But hang on, Dan. I'd love to continue next year because I think there's a lot to dig into on this. Pei, I'd like to give the last 1 minute to you. You've been around a while. You've seen lots of cycles. You've seen lots of different things. How do you respond to this trade-off, this debate?
I'm probably the oldest here, because I got to start my first company in 1970, so quite a few years ago. And I was reflecting sometimes that since then, GDP per capita in Europe is 4 times higher. You know, when I grew up, there were 3 billion people, and 80% living below the poverty line. Now we're 8 million and 10% living. We have an exceptionally fantastic development in the world economy, and people have so much better. But when it comes, all fashion, hospitality, all those things are important, nice for people. But healthcare and education are key somewhere, you know. And if you don't manage to bring in the right way in doing that, then you will get disrespect for politicians, and you will have problems also with democracy. And there are lots of money being spent by politicians that are not being spent in a proper way. So I think that is a part of this, how to build the right private-public partnership. I still believe that it's very good that we have a common insurance system, so we pay for education and healthcare together, but it has to be provided in a smarter way.
So in good Swedish style, you're somewhere in between.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, we're out of time. Thank you very much indeed for a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.